Hi, happy Easter. This is Mike from LBK Presbyterian Church, and just hello to the church family, hello to other family, hello to friends, hello to the community. Happy Easter to you all. I hope you're having a good Easter, hopefully enjoying some Easter eggs or hot cross buns or chocolate rabbits or whatever you're doing. But hopefully you're well, and enjoying Easter morning. Now, I've just read from John chapter 20, and I want to spend a moment just to reflect upon that, on what is going on there. Now, we see the different emotions, don't we, in the text, and we can think about the emotions we've felt over the last few weeks with the COVID-19, and two big emotions would be fear and sorrow. Fear and sorrow. Those feelings are perfectly natural. Notice them in the reading in John 20. Where, while it's still dark, Mary goes to the tomb and she sees that the stone has been removed. And so she runs to Simon Peter. We see that emotion of fear. Well, obviously, the fear is that the worst thing that could possibly happen has happened on that occasion. That is, his body has been taken, probably by the authorities. Well, this would be the only logical or rational explanation. And so, she runs and tells them. They go, and Peter goes inside the tomb, and he sees that it's true. He believes they have taken Jesus. They've taken him. And so we get that panic and that flight and fright response, and they run back. In verse 10, the disciples went back to where they were staying. They go back probably, well, no doubt locking the doors, hunkering down. But it stays with Mary. We see Mary's the emotions that are there for her. Now, Mary stood outside the tomb and she's crying. She's weeping. A different kind of emotion overwhelms her. It's one of sorrow, one of sadness. Now, she doesn't care that this is probably not a safe place for her to be. She's wrapped up not in sorrow, not in fear, but in sorrow. Of course, it's appropriate to acknowledge these emotions, fear and sorrow, this Easter, because that's the way things have been in our world. So often when we think about Easter, we think about victory, and we tend to focus on the positive, and we should focus on the victory of Jesus. But we shouldn't do that at the expense of the real emotions that people are experiencing, or the reality of suffering in our world. We are blessed to live in a place like New Zealand, but a lot of the world is experiencing this Easter with a sense of sorrow and a sense of fear, and no amount of kind of wishful thinking will take that away. So that's okay to think that, to feel that, and to be kind of in tune with those emotions. That's okay. But I also want to say, as a Christian, that on the first Easter, it's when we remember that there is hope. And although there is death, and death is a reality, our hope doesn't stay locked up in the tomb. And our hope doesn't stay dead. Our hope, it's Jesus. He walks out of the tomb. We'll see what happens in the text. We see Mary, she's crying, and she's aware that there's these two, well, maybe she doesn't know it's angels, but there's two people in white seated where Jesus' body was. And then, she speaks to them, and then she notices that there's someone else there. And she thinks, it's the gardener, probably coming to check on, do some gardening. Now, just as an aside, in John's Gospel, it says that Jesus was buried in, his tomb was in a garden. And we are meant to be reminded of the first garden in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. And the first person in Genesis, the first gardener, Adam. And so here we have a new garden. And we have a new gardener, the new Adam, that's Christ. And so, but Mary thinks it's just the gardener, and so she says, Well, he asks her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you put him and I will get him." We see what he says to her. He speaks her name. "Mary," he says. "Mary." He speaks her name. He speaks into her sorrow, and he brings her himself, his presence, his comfort. He speaks her name. He is not dead. And that's what Jesus does for us. He calls us. He calls us by name. And that's because if you know him, he knows you. And he knows your name, and you are his. And we see what Mary does. I mean, Jesus says he can't, stay. He's got other things to do. He needs to go to the Father. Mary races back, and she's breathless, and she goes and shares this with the other disciples. Now, we know from the other Gospels that they kind of think she's hysterical. But yeah, she's probably overwhelmed, a fear probably moving into joy, a sense of joy. Well, that news, I'm sure, comes like a shock to them. There's probably a large degree of disbelief for them. Well, that's until we see verse 19. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And after he said this, he showed them his hands and sides and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. See the Lord's first words to those probably quite, understandably frightened disciples. Peace be with you. The first words of the Lord to the disciples. Peace be with you. Well, in a sense, nothing has changed in terms of their situation. There's still the authorities. There's still, the fact of the crucifixion. It still really did happen. But Jesus comes and says, "Peace be with you." So, some things haven't changed, but in a bigger sense, everything's changed, because hope has stepped out of the tomb and brings peace, and speaks about peace and brings peace to those in fear. And so maybe for us, if we've felt a little bit afraid, and that's really understandable, maybe that's what Jesus says to us. We don't know what tomorrow or next week or the next few weeks or months will bring, do we? But Jesus comes, like he came to them, and he says, "Peace be with you." Now, this doesn't minimize the problems or take away what's happened, but he comes and brings peace. And the peace that Jesus gives, it was a costly kind of peace. It comes at a cost. It came at the cost of the cross, of enduring the cross for us. It's not just peace among ourselves, but peace with God. It's peace with our Father through the cross. And so that first Easter, Jesus comes, the Son of God comes, he steps out of the tomb, and he calls us all by name. And he offers us peace. He says, "Peace be with you." And so my prayer, friends, is that you would know his peace this Easter Sunday 2020, because Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. So happy Easter. God bless. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.